Hey people, do you want to get your music into Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Tidal, and all the rest of the streaming services? Check out DistroKid. It's affordable and super easy to use. I've used it to distribute my music and I really dig it. Our listeners get 30% off at distrokid.com/talkguitars. That's 30% off for our listeners at distrokid.com/talkguitars. Go get it. Hey everybody, it's Chris and Rick Talk Guitars, and today we're going to talk about bass for guitar players. It's kind of a typical thing where we guitar players yearn to have a bass at some point, and I think it happens to all of us. And for me, that manifested in me buying a short scale Music Master bass that I love, and that's something I plunk around on. You had to go the full Monty on the bass though, not the short scale.
My wife has a bass, so yeah, and it's a full scale. And I thought about that. I agree. I think that a really good in for a guitar player is a short scale because it's so much comfortable.
Yeah.
But me, after thinking about it, I'm like, if I'm switching instruments, I want it to be really different from the guitar. You know what I mean? I want the whole bass experience. I want to have to reach farther. I totally understand a short scale. And I think if I had a short scale, the Music Master bass is a really cool one. That'd be, one of those. But yeah, so I really wanted to go for the experience of that. So I got my wife's like precision bass, which I bought her about 10 years ago or something, and forever I didn't like playing the bass. I'd have it around and I'd be making a demo or working on a song, and it's like, oh, this needs a bass, and I'd look at it and I'd go, shit, I don't want to play that thing. And so, but just recently over the summer, I've been trying to spend every weekend that I can either making up some original instrumental music or finishing something that I've had in the past. And I really took a shine to bass. I mean, I started to understand how to work with it. And what I did previously, and I think a lot of guitar players probably run into this, is I had two modes when I was going to do a bass part. It was either like on the root, just super, super basic, just putting some bottom end on there, or the ridiculously over melodic guitar player. Right. There was no in between. And every once in a while, I might, happy accident, get like a cool groovy bass part. But once I started to understand the bass and how it works, I started to make myself happy with bass parts. And then I started to look forward to coming up with bass parts because it's completely different than coming up with guitar parts. You know what I mean?
What got you inspired recently? Just out of curiosity, was there a moment or a song or just?
No, just hearing it, like kind of making that connection between the kick drum and the bass, and like how much of the groove you're responsible for and how much space to leave for the other instruments. And, like playing a guitar player, I'm always kind of focused on the snare drum. If I'm thinking about drums, that's kind of where, I hear and I kind of acclimate myself to and kind of gauge where I'm at. But on the bass, it's it's the kick drum. And, I've always heard that, but I've always like, whatever, I'm playing a bass part, whatever. I just want to be low here and have this good bass sound. But once you realize that, and I learned too that every time I would do a bass part and I'd be listening to the finished demo or whatever, and I'm like, this song has a really good feel. What is it? I start looking at what it is, and it's always the bass and what it's doing with the kick drum. And it comes up with this groove, and it's like, oh yeah. So sometimes accidentally I would hit it, but now I kind of consciously look for things to do around that. Just recently, I just really started to take to it. So now I enjoy playing. I look forward to it. So
my inspiration has definitely been listening to isolated tracks or just listening to songs like, obviously there's the main ones we know, like Motown, James Jamerson or McCartney and the Beatles, or even Scotty Summers, the bass player that you were tight with, played with for many years. And yeah, that's the thing. As guitar players, I think it's hard for me anyway. That was a hurdle for me, is to not think like a guitar player and think in terms of just the groove and the kick drum, and having that be my motivation for playing the instrument, And for me, I do like I love jazz basses. So, that's what I gravitated towards because it's got a small neck. But the short scale for me is, like you said, exactly. It's so close to playing a guitar because of the scale. And I put flats on mine because I just love
That's
the
cool.
sound of those flats. I love the
Yeah.
fuzzy bass. But yeah, that I still struggle with it in terms of just thinking in terms of groove and not thinking about the chords or you know what I mean? Like I think we
Right.
talked about this before, but and so it's just I think what I need to what I do is I just keep listening to other bass players that I really like and listening to them in the context of songs and what they're doing and how it's juxtaposing or counterpointing the guitar, right? It's not
Right.
a lot of times, yeah, it's not even playing the root. It's just like it's focused on the groove and it's a counterpoint to the other instruments in the band.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just taking another instrument and just learning where stuff sits in the context of a song. And you can step back and you know, like, well, I know where this area is, where the bass goes. So my guitar doesn't, I can do something with the guitar and having this knowledge that I might not have done before. And one thing I just thought about is since probably the 90s, I have always a big part of my guitar playing has been home recording. It used to be a
Yeah.
4 track. I don't think if I didn't have some way to record music, I don't know if I'd be into the bass because I got to hear it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's definitely a tool that guitar players can use to like help them grow, but I don't know what someone would do if they don't have, if they can't record it. I mean, because you could come up with a cool part, but for me, what really made it happen was hearing it in the song or writing a part in a song and seeing how that works. And, because like everything else, I'm learning piano too. And like
That's
everything
cool.
else, when I come up with a part, it's like I listen to it, I'm like, that sounds cool, that's great. And then you listen to it back and you're like, there's way too much shit in there. I just got to start chopping that off. And I say this all the time. As I get older and older and, playing guitar more and more, I try to look for ways to take shit out. And with the bass, it's super important there too. I mean, the bass is much closer to playing the drums than it is the guitar. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And that's not to say that especially in the 70s, there's a lot of cool, really straightforward, simple bass. Good rock bass playing like Phil Lynott of Thin Lizzy. I mean, he did really, it's, not super complicated driving bass. It doesn't have to always be like super, super groovy, but, just learning, for me, learning where the bass goes in the context of a crowded song and making the song stand out it's been a really cool learning experience for me, and hopefully it's going to make me a better guitar player.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I've always had either a 4 track or something that I've been able to record songs and get them down. Also, might help the song go in a different direction, right? If you can put all these instruments or as many instruments as you can into the arrangement of the song that you're doing, it could make you think about the song in a different way or think about a certain part in a different way, right? Now that you've got these instruments working with each other or fighting against each other in a mix, you're going, oh, that didn't work as much as I thought it was going to work or something like that. So it's a great way to also just feel your way through a song that you're trying to write. If you have if you're in a band and you have the ability to jam them out in a band context, I think that's cool too
Yeah.
and preferable probably. But for you and me, exactly, we spend a lot of time at home and we'd like to plunk around and write stuff. And it's easy to just put it down on recording and then get a sense of what it's going to sound like if I put this bass on it or other instruments on it. So yeah, I think that's a great point. Like you were saying before, I mean, there are just basic bass players that I really admire. I mean, I love the Ramones. I mean, and that's as basic as you can get. Dee Dee was
Right.
just playing the root note of pretty much every song, but
Yeah.
it works right in that context. But
Totally.
so do you find that like that when you put different instruments into a song, it makes you think about the song differently or
No, absolutely. Yeah. The
yeah,
piano too. I mean, I did some this weekend, I did some piano stuff. And yeah, it's definitely, you have to think differently. I mean,
yeah,
you can't just jam. That's one of the things that I love doing now is try to make something really dense with a lot of different instruments. Cause I've been doing like strings and shit like that, like, programmed strings,
uh,
and just finding a way to make all that stuff fit so it's not a complete mess. You learn a lot about how shit goes together. There's that saying, which is true, is like a band is only as good as their drummer. And I think that's totally true, but I think it should be extended to rhythm section. You know what I mean?
yeah, I
Because
think
I
so
think you
too.
can almost, a lot of times you could get away more with like a hack guitar player, definitely, than a
Yeah,
hack bass player. You know what I
yeah,
mean? It's
I
like it's
agree.
super, super important. So it's a big deal of the way the band sounds. And you mentioned the Ramones, yeah, and that kind of rudimentary like driving bass playing was super important to the sound of that band. You know what I mean?
Totally.
And I love Motown and soul stuff, so that's
Oh
great.
man, yeah.
And you mentioned Scotty Summers, who was my old bass player. It was really amazing. And I have this story I always tell. is we had been in a band for maybe 6 months or something like that. And we went to record our first record. And we'd been playing these songs. Like I said, we've been playing for months. And we're in there, and Scotty's doing a bass part in the control room. And I'm sitting there on the couch and I'm watching him and I'm going, what the fuck is that? I'm like, he's just all over the neck. It's just crazy. And I'm like, how does the song even fit in there? You know what I mean?
Right.
And then you hear it back and it's like this beautiful, groovy, it's that McCartney thing. You know what I mean? He can be super melodic and super busy, but never lose the groove. You know, I mentioned I wasn't really into bass guitar before that. It wasn't because of the thing where, you know, bass is a lesser instrument than the guitar. You know, it's like a 4-string guitar. It's easy, whatever. There's no glory or whatever.
Yeah.
The reason I stayed away from it was more because I know if I want to go for it, I want to be good at it.
Totally.
And go down that rabbit hole. And it really takes a different kind of thinking and a kind of, you got to push yourself.
Yeah, I agree. The hurdle for me all the time is not that I look down on the bass at all. The contrary is, like you said, I think the most important part of a band is the rhythm section. That because music is feel. And the whole feel of the song is the rhythm section. And so it's daunting because you pick up the bass and you, as a guitar player, you know, I go to the root, I do this other stuff, but then it is inspiring too these days where you can listen to isolated tracks. And I listen to McCartney and James Jamerson and all these great bass players. That's helpful because that helps drive my brain in that direction of, hey, it's groove, feel. And it's not about, and it's a lot of times the bass playing that I hear is just filling. It's like a puzzle, you know, and the guitar is playing a part of the puzzle, and the vocals are part of the puzzle, and then boom, the bass player is figuring out how to put these other pieces in that aren't necessarily related to the root note, but that are helping drive the song along.
Right, right.
And the groove of the song, which is super cool.
Yeah, it's about groove, but it's also like the syncopation in a bass is completely different than you would do in, you know, with other instruments. It's in like soul music and a bunch of other music. It's the root and the octave and the 5. They use that all. I mean, like that Pink Floyd Money lick. That's the root. That's the basic of it. But there's so many songs that use that, and I that was something from looking at and playing a lot. It's like I started to think about that in the context of the guitar sometimes. And that's another thing I just thought of. For me, playing by ear and by, you know, just years and years of doing this and working things out, you know, the guitar is all about patterns and sounds. I see these patterns and I know how they sound. When you have the bass, it kind of takes off these two strings and you look differently, completely differently at the instrument as you start to see patterns that you wouldn't see before. And, you know, it just gives you a different area of focus, which was another reason why I'm glad that, you know, I have access to a full scale bass, you know, because it's even more different. So, I mean, sometimes I'm like, where am I on this? It takes a while. And I'm not good enough yet to really do a lot on the high G string yet and not have it sound super fruity, but it's just a great way to kickstart your guitar playing. You know, the same with piano. It's just a different kind of way to look at building music.
Just like we learned from guitar players, that's what I'm really enjoying too, is just learning from bass players and like you were saying, figuring out parts to songs, just copying songs that from a bass perspective rather than a guitarist perspective. And it's super helpful. And it's fun actually, because it kind of reminds me of when I was putting records on and slowing them down and trying to figure out guitar parts.
Right.
Now I'm trying to figure out bass parts, and the technology is cool because, you know, you can isolate them or
slow it down on YouTube. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But luckily too, the bass is such a distinct instrument. Usually you can hear it in the mix anyway, unless it's a pretty dense band or something like that. But yeah, I've been getting into Tina Weymouth, and then also I think John Deacon from Queen. That guy's underrated, I think, as a bass player. Like, I've listened to a lot of Queen lately, and he's still alive, I guess. He's cool. He's a cool bass player. Yeah. So, I mean, that mindset has really kind of inspired me lately too, is just copying, you know, bass like I used to do with guitar players, you know, and it's helped. It's helped a ton too. Just because what you said is so important. It's like, it's a totally different headspace than guitar. It just is. And every instrument has its own thing, and your service to a song is different, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the key thing that I really enjoy about looking at a song or music from a different perspective, is just how am I going to serve the song now in this capacity, right? I mean, I'm so used to doing it in this other capacity. Now I got to figure out, okay, well, what are the best ways for me to do that, playing bass.
Yeah, and putting bass on your own things, I think, is really kind of a great learning experience because, I'm kind of a melodic guitar player a lot of times, so I have a lot going on, like not just chording a lot, and there's little broken chords and melodies. The bass needs to accommodate that. You know what I mean? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
so here's where I hear this in the song, in my guitar, I naturally hear this melody. So I'm going to go for this melody. So that means I'm going to have to come up with something else on the bass that kind of doesn't do the same thing because that's where I want to go, but something that supports it, whether it's just just play simple or play off of it or something like that. And you just start rethinking the way like music fits together. It's super cool.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I get caught up in thinking that there's only one bass line that is the optimal bass line for this song, and I think that's wrong too. I think there could be
What do you mean?
several. Well, like I'll be playing like it in my mind. I'm trying to search for this one bass line that is probably the only correct part to fit this song. You know what I mean? There's only one, or like it's like thinking about it. Takes of a song in a studio, like thinking there's only going to be one perfect take, or I was listening to this producer talk about it, and he goes, if that's the way you think about it, like there's only one chance to capture this magic, then that's kind of crazy, right? I get,
Right.
hopefully I'm making my point, but anyway, for bass, it's like I got to get out of the mindset of thinking, oh, I'm only trying to find one specific perfect bass line for this song, because there could be several that will work with that song, I guess is what I'm
You
saying.
mean in the context of the song, like
Yeah,
for this part, I'm
yes.
playing this bass line, and then for this part, I play this bass part. Yeah, no,
Yeah, but
totally.
yeah. And so
Yeah,
and that kind of hangs me up sometimes. And I got to step back and go, no, I mean, there can be, yeah, figure out obviously what sounds, you'll start to key in on stuff that sounds right. But, like you were saying, it could be complex, it could be simple, but as long as it's serving its purpose in the song, but I don't know. That kind of is a hurdle for me sometimes, thinking, oh, and then I
yeah.
step away from it and go, well,
Well, I used to do that because, like I said, I was like, I was really impatient with the bass, and I didn't really want to play it, but I knew I had to have it on my song because it would sound good. And that's the same thing. I'll just come up with this part, and like that's good enough. Instead of doing like what you said, little variations here and there, and like,
yeah.
the places for little climbs and little walks and things like that are just tasty. And they're, you're not being a guitar player. It's really easy to go over the top and be climbing all over this shit, but just the tasty in the right place.
I kind of want to just tip my hat too to drummers and bass players especially, because they do get short shrift, I think, a lot. But any musician knows the importance of the rhythm section and how important that is to music and songs. And so that's another thing that I think guitar players could appreciate more if they picked up the bass and try to play it themselves, or don't think about it a lot in terms of take it for granted or whatever. But I've always dug bass players. I've always dug bass lines, and it's the connective tissue of the music. That's another cool thing I think about is, the drums and bass are really what's connecting everything and driving everything. And it gives the other instruments something to, it's like a foundation, I mean, with all of this stuff, I think most people kind of understand and know. We're kind of, maybe it's obvious, but I think it's worth thinking about more in depth as a musician too, because just think it'll help you grow as a musician. It certainly has helped me. Like you were saying, I think I'm trying to do that too, is play less as a guitar player, play better parts and less. And so that the song can do its thing essentially.
Which is hard. It's
It
really
is
hard.
hard.
I
It is
mean,
hard.
it's like you just feel like I'm hanging here. I should be playing something. Why am I stopped?
Yeah.
Why? But and then you hear it back and you're like, oh, that's really cool. I mean, and then the more instruments you have in a song, bass becomes even more important. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's
Yeah.
just not a cacophony of shit going on. There's like bass for things to on guitar now. Maybe I won't do something that I would do like on the low strings. Maybe I'm going to do something that's like that area. Let's leave that for the bass. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
focus on that. And I mean, I've had access to that bass since probably 2010. And like I said, I used it a lot, but it was always like, oh, geez, I don't want to do that. And, I'm kind of like a perfectionist sometimes. And sometimes I like overthink things. So that's
Mhm.
something that I have to deal with too and get better at, is because I'll spend like a good couple of hours working on a bass part.
Oh yeah.
I have a
Yeah.
song and I end up liking it. It's great. And I'm kind of took it from where it was just kind of really ordinary, kind of dumb bass part to something that really works with the song. But sometimes I'll put a lot of time into it. I look like, holy shit, 3 hours just passed. The other thing, if I'm stuck, and I don't know if I mentioned this now, but if I get stuck sometimes and I have the song, I'm playing along
Mhm.
with the song, and like, well, I know where the chords are. I got a couple of little things I can do here, but it's just not really feeling that great. Is just mute everything but the drums in that song,
Yeah.
and then play. Then you can't help but hear the kick and find some shit, get some syncopated shit going on, and you can come up with a pretty cool part.
Yeah, and as we're talking about space, it just reminds me of Miles Davis, right? He was the king of like it's what you don't play, you know. I think we humans have a tendency to want to fill space, whether it's visually or
Yeah,
there's dead space, but that can be so powerful in a song. If you really step back and you think about the space in a song, either A, it's gonna create drama within the song, or B, it's gonna leave room for other stuff that might even add more to the song, right? Whether it's a guitar part or keyboards or whatever it is. And that's kind of cool. And that's kind of cool to think about.
I tend to listen to a lot of older music, and
Hmm.
especially a lot of rock older music. It's amazing how much space is and stuff, and
Yeah.
how defined the guitar parts are, which we've totally gotten away from. Like riffs, there's two guitar players in the band, and they're each playing one half of a riff that works, and they're not strumming, they're just doing. I mean, it doesn't work for every song. I mean, it just depends
Yeah.
on the song, but it's really rare to see that now, and it's really
Yeah.
hard to do. Like, okay, here's a riff. It's just gong, 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 and that's what I'm going to play. And I'm not going to, add any other little tricks to it or anything. And it's hard to do, and you don't hear it that often. But if you have the right vehicle for doing that, I think it would sound really cool. I mean, I think people would take notice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed that forever. And I always say, like, with my home recordings, it's like, I want to make a 70s style rock song where there's all the space. Like, I've yet to be able to do it. First of all, I can't usually come up with a riff as cool as some of those riffs, but also I'm just so used to like filling space with my
I know.
guitar and
Yeah.
and with that whatever. So just being aware of that though is great because you're right. Some of the best music is no music where the space is. And
Oh, that's cool. Well, I'm glad it's cool that you kind of, rather than looking at it as an arduous task that you don't really want to do, now you're kind of enjoying looking forward to playing bass and you're enjoying it more. And it's not
right.
as daunting as it was. I'm kind of there, but it's still daunting for me. Just it's in the back of my mind that I'm not a bass player and I want to, I guess that's the driving force for me is like you were saying, I want to create a cool, distinct bass line that's going to do all the things we just talked about. It's going to drive the song. It's going to have a groove. It's going to do its own thing, but it's harder said than done, I think.
Yep.
I mean, some people can just do it because they have a natural affinity for it, but for me, it's really difficult to get in that headspace and trust. That's another thing is trusting it because from a guitar perspective, I'm like we were talking about, we're so used to playing chords and filling space from that headspace. But I think just the more I do it and the more I listen to other bass players and it'll start to take shape and influence the way I approach when I want to put a bass on one of my songs.
Oh, and another cool trick is if you don't
Uh-huh.
have a bass and you're recording and you want to put bass on something, I've done this before too, is you just play it on guitar and then you drop it. Like all
Oh,
these
that's
programs,
cool.
you can like drop them down. And sometimes it sounds pretty convincing. Like if I want it to sound like a precision, I might use a Stratocaster and maybe on the neck pickup or something. And it sounds pretty convincing.
Oh, that's
Sometimes it
cool.
just sounds really like a rubber band and shitty. But
Yeah.
other times it's like I listen to some stuff and I'm like, that was the guitar. And it's really hard to tell. So I know that a lot of people aren't really into the technical aspect. They might not want to be at like record music, because it takes like, you got to go through some shit and you got to, deal with troubleshooting and you have to have kind of be tech savvy and keep up on stuff. And some people don't want to bring that into their
Yeah.
music. And I totally understand. And for that, if I didn't record like I do to software, a looper pedal is great too for
Yeah.
like, get yourself a nice, maybe a guitar riff going around and around, and then you can plug in a bass and play along to that. So that would be one way to do it without having to record. But I think anybody that screws around with playing bass, it'll bring something to their guitar playing. And the same with like piano. I mean, I've already seen that too. Piano's that's a whole different ballgame. I'm not going to live long enough to play piano as well as I want to play piano. But I mean, I'm already starting to hack it away on some little songs and stuff. And organ, I was always dicked around with organ a little bit, but now
Uh-huh.
that's gotten a lot better. So
Well, the looper thing's a great idea. Yeah, and that's pretty simple, pretty low hanging fruit to do. You just yeah, stomp on it and do your get some kind of thing going and then play to that. That's a really
uh,
good idea.
the looper is an amazing guitar tool that, I don't use it that much anymore because I've been recording so much. And my recording rig is set up in the living room, so I can record anytime I
Nice.
want, just plug in. And that's why I try to keep all my instruments. The bass is leaning over in the corner, so everything's ready to go. Because if I have to hook up mics and all this bullshit, I'm like, I'm not going to do that. But the looper pedal is kind of like a Swiss Army knife. What I use it for is a lot of times if there's a new song, or like sometimes we'll be way between shows. I haven't played in a long time, and I have like solos that I kind of maybe forgot about. As I'll
Mhm.
just do the parts and just solo over them and practice and work out parts like that. And that's really cool. And I don't know, the technology for guitar players now is in a really, really good place. There's no excuse not to probably be great. And that's probably why there are so many great young guitar players now, fuckers,
Yeah, it's kind of insane.
and bass players, I should
And
say.
bass players, yeah. There's so much technology. But that's a I'm glad you hit on that too, because I have a looper pedal. I didn't use very much, but even without recording, that is a good way to just riff on things, and maybe that will be a huge inspiration, right? Because you can just loop something and riff on it for literally hours and until you come up with something that works.
Until they start knocking on the ceiling up above you.
Yeah, until your significant other breaks down the door and beats you with a baseball bat. Well, that was great, man. So if you're a guitar player out there, I highly recommend you try to dabble in bass or keyboards or something else and get another perspective on how that instrument might fit into a song. And maybe you might switch instruments too. Who knows? I mean, so many people did that too, right? That were guitar players, and that there was already a guitar player in the band. It's like, well, I'll play bass, or
Right.
they make you play bass, right? And great bass players too, by the way. I think they have were put in that position, but yeah, I mean, I think it's a great idea just to try something else on and see if you like it. But bass is a
Right.
great way to start. And like we said, you get a short scale because it's very close to the scale of a guitar, and or if you want to go all in. I mean, I love jazz basses because the neck is so small. But you're partial to the precisions, right? Because
Yeah,
you
they're
kind
just
of dig
such a
that.
classic
Yeah,
thing. I really, I could probably make anything work because, like I said, I only use it for recording, so I don't need much.
yeah,
But I did find that when I really started to take interest in the bass, that it's like, yeah, I want the whole big fucking bass thing where it's like, because I want to make myself think differently. Even though I'm sure the short scale is not exactly like a guitar. It's pretty big and it feels definitely different. But
yeah.
I wanted like to get as far as you could from the guitar, I guess.
I don't think that's a bad idea because I think mentally it just helps give you another element that is outside your comfort zone. Yeah, I think it's a good idea actually. If you can, try it on a full size bass. But yeah, well, as always, man, thanks for listening, everybody out there. We really appreciate it. We're members of the Ruinous Media Network. Listen to us on all the podcast places like Apple and Spotify. And oh, is that Stanley or Bell?
This is Belle.
Oh, hi, Bell. Bell's
You gonna say
waving to
something? She
me
was
on the Zoom meeting.
shouting earlier. You gonna say something? Say something.
Say
Say
something.
something. Come on.
Come on. This
Oh,
is
now
your
she's
big
not.
moment. Okay. All right. But anyway, yeah, check us out and shoot us an email or shoot us something on social media. And until next time, man. Chris, what do you got?
Play bass or something like that, or play with your cat. Yeah.